Aloha mai kako, and welcome to this session of Brown Bag Biography, the longest running seminar series at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Today's talk is number 769. They started in the mid-1980s, and they were the idea of George Simpson, the Emeritus Director of the Center for Biographical Research, and the advertising and the promotion and all the organization is being very ably done by Paige Rasmussen, the Managing Editor of Biography and the manager of the center, and also Zoe Sprott, our graduate assistant, who has done a wonderful job. So I'd like to thank both of them. Before introducing our speakers, I just want to mention a few events. We are doing this basically every Thursday at 12 o'clock. So I'm just going to mention the next few so people can be aware of what's coming up. Next week, same time, same virtual reality, we'll be featuring Gail Okawa, who's a professor of Emerita of English at Youngstown State University and a visiting scholar at the Center for Biographical Research, who will be talking about remembering our grandfather's exile from biography to communal biography on Hawaii's Issei internment. Gail is the author of a recent book on the experience of those from Hawaii who were interned. As many of you know, it was a much smaller group of highly influential individuals, but there were definitely Issei interned from Hawaii, including Gail's grandfather. And this book has just come out recently from Press, and she will be talking about the life experience of those exiles. The following week, Kalaniopua Young, a lecturer at University of Hawaii at Manoa and Hawaii Pacific University, and a board member of KØ-A, the Hawaiian Environmental Alliance, Trans Hawaii, and the Hawaii Abolition Collective, will be talking about home is what we make it. The following week, February 25th, we're going to have a sister act, actually. Lisa Grandinetti, union organizer at Unite Here, Local 5, and graduate of Ethnic Studies and Women's Studies, and Tina Grandinetti, PhD candidate at RMIT University Center for Urban Research in Melbourne, Australia, and currently the office manager at the Office of Representative Amy Peruso, are going to be talking about sharing the experience of being sister activists in a variety of venues. With those last two, Kalaniopua's and also Lisa and Tina's, they are also contributors to the volume The Value of Hawai 3, Hulihia, The Turning, which they share with our speakers for today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But I just wanted to mention that their talks are also arising out of our featuring the contributors from that particular volume. If you want further information or would like to be getting messages about those, Zoe will be putting that material up. In fact, just did. The mailing list just went up for CBR, and that will also connect you over to all the different places that you can find out about our upcoming events. Okay. All right. Now, oh, I should also mention that at the end of this month, because this has a real connection to life writing and the Center for Biographical Research, Anna DeVere Smith, one of the most sort of visible oral historians, performers, actresses. She is actually going to be doing a virtual residency as the holder of the Daniel K. Inouye Chair for 2021 at the end of February. So she will be doing keynote presentations and a number of other talk stories about her career as somebody who has found a variety of different ways to represent America. Right. So today, I also want to mention that the speakers all contributed to Value of Hawaii 3, Hulihia, The Turning, which now actually exists in physical form. You're going to be getting your copies, and you can get this for $24.95 from the University of Hawaii Press. It's now available that way. But I also want to point out that this book, because this was part of the vision of putting this third volume together from the very beginning, is available always, and it will be available always for free as a download, either of the individual essays or the entire book. And Zoe just put that up there as well too. It's been very popular. I don't know that the contributors know this, but we're up in the realm already of about 10,000 downloads, and the book came out in October. So, and The book itself is a collection of essays and visions which ask us to recognize what we truly value about our home and offer a wealth of starting points for critical and productive conversations together in this time of profound and permanent change. These are short 1,500-word essays. There are 65 to 70 contributors who run across the sort of entire range of Hawaii. It's a very, very impressive group, and we have three of the most impressive here today. So we will be staging all sorts of events involving discussions of what we can see as potential futures in difficult times. Right. Okay. Now, okay. So, aloha mai kākou. Haoli wau e ho'ulauna ia oko I keia mau wahine mana aloha I keia manawa I kuka pili ana I ka wā mahope o Hawaii nei. Welcome, and I'm very, very pleased to introduce the three exceptionally impressive women who are going to be talking here today about their particular take on what needs to be the future for Hawaii. All three of them are not just fluent Hawaiian speakers, but Hawaiian educators. All three of them are profoundly committed to Hawaiian education in a variety of ways, and that's what they're going to be talking about today. They're also here, though, because in all of their essays, because this is a Center for Biographical Research, they all made the political or the planning personal. They all have important and moving stories to tell. And not surprisingly, the Center for Biographical Research is very interested in autobiography, personal witness, testimony, all of which is taking place in their work and their lives. I'm going to introduce all three briefly. What will happen then is each one will probably speak for about 10 minutes, either about their essay or what they feel is most compelling to talk about in terms of their own personal investment in what they're doing. We will then open it up for discussion between them, but we will also welcome questions in the chat room, which I will then pass on to the speakers to be able to answer. So that's the procedure we're going to follow here. Okay, our first speaker will be Kahakalau. Her essay in The Value of Hawaii 3 Hulihia, the turning, is called Ancient is Modern, Transforming Public Education for Hawaiians. She is a Native Hawaiian educator, researcher, cultural practitioner, grassroots activist, and expert in Hawaiian language, history, and culture. After founding and directing the first Hawaiian-focused charter school and teacher licensing program, she is launching KÖ-A-KANAKA, Hawaii's first sustainable higher education and career training program. And because this is about the personal, in each case, I'm just going to offer a couple of other comments. Kahakalau received her BA, I believe, in Hawaiian Studies, and she might have been almost the very first. One of my favorite moments is she spoke as the valedictorian, as I recall, and in the process at the commencement pointed out that it was an insult to the students that a military officer had been asked to address them as the commencement speaker. This sort of paved the way and anticipated probably what was coming. She then went on to get an MA in European languages because there was no MA in Hawaiian Studies or Hawaiian language. It's a brilliant MA thesis, which was on foreign visitors to Hawaii and the Pacific, their impressions, literary impressions, but they weren't English because Kahakalau, in addition to speaking Ōlelo Hawaiʻi and Ōlelo Pelekane, she's also fluent in French and German, and as I remember, there was some Russian in there as well too. I met up with her because somebody sent her over to me because now she was looking for a doctoral program because there was no MA in European languages. Kahakalau was the first Kanaka Maoli admitted into our very recently established PhD program in English, with the plan that she would actually write a doctorate strongly focused on Ōlelo and Ike Hawaii. And that path, which she would have been the first person on, actually turned out to set up the way for quite a number of later Kanaka Maoli scholars who have followed. She took 4 courses and was moving forward, but then she came to my office one day and said she had to leave. She was already a certified teacher in the public school system, and she said that she couldn't continue the degree because she had to do something about how few Hawaiian students were going on to university, which she did. And in the process, she completed a doctorate in education. She created schools to meet the needs that weren't being met, and in the process has become one of Hawaii's most powerful and renowned educators. It's an honor to have you here today, Ku. Paige, Miki, Kalāokananiki, Okamura is her essay from Value of Hawai is He Makee Ōlelo Hawaiʻi, He Makee Lāhui. To lose our language is to forget who we are. Paige Okamura is the full-time mermaid, part-time DJ Keikipapa of Maiea Pa'ala'a Wailua, who takes every step forward looking backward to where and who she came from. I've had the opportunity to see Paige in a variety of scenes. She is ho'opapa, ho'ahanakeaka, haumana ame ho'alohano. She has been my classmate, my acting companion, my student, and my friend. She is also a translator and most visibly the kumu for free classes in Hawaiian that have drawn some attention, as in thousands, first on campus and now online. And of course, you can also hear her on Hawaii Public Radio in the evenings, bridging the gap with her music and thoughts. Presley, ke alaanuhea amuksang, her essay is He Kipuka Aloha Aina no Kaimi Na'oau. Presley is a kupa of Papakolea Oahu and an instructor of Hawaiian language at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. One of her most recent endeavors was the development and creation of Uhuluhulu University at Mauna Kea, Hawaii. I don't know Presley as well as I have known the other two at various times, but my admiration, I'm involved at the moment in editing 2 or 3 books which are referring to Mauna Kea in various ways. And what all of them agree on is just what an profoundly important and impressive person Presley is. She went over to help and she created a university which is now being pointed to as a kind of model for alternative and counter education of the kind that's been needed and can extend on into the future. So she basically walked into a situation of becoming great. These are our speakers today, all educators, all students, all profoundly inspiring, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what they want to share with us. So, cool. Oh, you're.
Aloha mai ka koe nā hoa mai ka piina ka lai hae hae ai ka mole olo ʻolehua. O wau o ku Kahakalau, keiki alopaka Kahakalau, keiki a Williama ke honui Kahakalau, keiki a Daniela ke kino Kahakalau, a me ke au o Pupele, o Honolulu ku o Nehānau, o Hawaii ku Mokupuni, o Hāmākua ku Moku, o Waipio ku Avava, o Hiʻilawe ku Wailele, a o Kūnaka ku Kāwai. Aloha mai kākou. So happy to be here today. Craig, you didn't have to butter me up this much. I appreciate it, and I do recall our times together, and time just flew by. I mean, the last 40 years have been a blur in a way, but a wonderful blur, especially now, we're celebrating Hawaiian Language Month, Mahina Ōlelo Hawaii, in February. And when we look at the progress that was made since, me and you interacted, in the 80s, late 80s kind of thing, to now, when we look at the progress in Hawaiian focused education, which was non-existent, in the 1980s all the way into the 90s, whenever people talked about Hawaiian education, they automatically talked about remedial education. That was the only thing that Hawaiian education was important for or good for or valuable was for those dummies, those Hawaiian dummies that couldn't handle the regular school system. Let's put them in the taro pads. Let's take them down to the beach. Let's have them weaving lauhala or um, creating, things with their hands, because that's all that they could do. They had no capacity to do anything rigorous or anything intellectual. So let's put them into a Hawaiian program. And so when I first started out as an educator, that was all there was. And now, there's no doubt we have established without a shadow of a doubt that Hawaiian culture-based education, I call it pedagogy of aloha, because the magic and the power and the mana of the transformation is in the power of aloha. The difference between Hawaiian culture-based education and the education that's out there right now in the public school system and pretty much in the private school system also is our focus on relation building as the first and foremost component of a quality system of education. I mean, they're finally figuring it out. They're calling it social emotional learning because that sounds like very academic. But really, what it boils down to is just simple, plain and simple aloha. It's care, it's compassion, it's kindness, it's building safe learning spaces, it's making our students, our learners of all ages feel cared for and loved and protected. And so what has emerged, because we didn't create pedagogy of aloha, it was something that emerged through our research from what the students told us was the change agent. And so in my little article there on ancient is modern, what we did started in the early 90s. We had gotten arrested for geothermal protecting Tutupele in Waikele and it was actually a way larger arrest. 140 something of us got arrested, but there was no social media, so nobody really knew about it. But we got together that night and talked about critical mass. How do we build critical mass, such as we witnessed at Mauna Kea, you know, 20 years later? And we said we have to start with the keiki. So we took the keiki for where it was 8 of us, young Hawaiians at that time, took 4 keiki each into Waipio for a moon cycle. And within that 1 month, they learned more about Hawaiian language and culture than I could teach them in an entire year at Honoka'a High School, even though I considered myself an outstanding teacher, and did whatever I needed to do to really teach Hawaiian language. And yet within that 1 month, they could learn so much more. But the changes that were even more profound was from going from this shy, introverted, hila, don't talk to me, put your head down, don't ask me to take my shirt off because I have a little bit flabby belly and whatever, at the beginning of this moon cycle, to standing there proud in their malo, chanting in Hawaiian, when this is again early 90s, when nobody was chanting in Hawaiian yet, except maybe in a certain halau kind of thing. Standing there doing his ho'ike, chanting proudly in Hawaiian, and parents just crying because they could see the transformation and the rigor of this kind of education, and how much even their child changed physically to something more beautiful, more confident, because through the connection of their culture and this aloha that we showed them 24/7, they were able to change in a very short time. And so relations, number one, and then relevance, number two. So whatever we were teaching them had to make sense, right? If we're not going to be teaching about some place far away, some animals, some whatever that we've never seen, that we don't care about, we're going to be teaching about our aina, the birds, the animals, the fish that we catch, that we see, the eo that we observe, and we learn about our environment. So place-based education. The other part was that our kupuna tell us through our Ōlelo no Eau that with Ike comes kuleana. Never is there just a presentation and a teaching of knowledge without responsibility attached to do something with this knowledge. So we have relations plus relevance plus responsibility, meaning students understand their kuleana to their learning. And then we're automatically going to end up with rigor. And first, And still yet some people try to define that as cultural rigor, is less than academic rigor, right? When we talk about Hawaiian culture-based education, a lot of them say, oh yeah, this is their cultural rigor, and then this is their academic rigor. Baloney, again, we're putting us less than the other guys. So we talk about contemporary rigor, which is everything that the students need to know to be responsible 21st century global citizens. And then we talk about traditional rigor, which is all that ike that our kupuna brought to us. And our students reach both levels. The ike that they need to function in the 21st century, and the ike that's going to help us solve the problems of the 21st century, which is our traditional ike. So it's this balance of ancient and modern. And we have developed the models already. So we know what to do to create our own parallel system of education. And when I talk about that kinana ho'ona'awau in my paper, this is the model that we have already developed. We have the right, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples clearly gives us the right to design and control our own models. And we know how it works on the PK-12 level because we've developed that through the Hawaiian Focus Charter movement and many other programs, after school programs, summer school programs within private and public schools that are really working, that are what we call Hawaiian focus. Now I'm working on the post-secondary model, and I was just telling Presley, we should join forces. We already work together up at the Mauna, but really also to kind of cross-pollinate, because we are creating air ecoversity. We launched it in October, hoping for 10 learners for the first year between 15 and 30 Native Hawaiians, the ages of 15 to 30. We were hoping for 10 students. By December, we had 33 students. So there's definitely a need there. And it is a higher education and career training program for young Hawaiians to reach their highest level. And so we're super excited that now we're creating that post-secondary piece. And then we're going to start pushing really, really hard on asserting our right to design our own education and establish a parallel system of education that was first advocated in 1997 by the Native Hawaiian Education Council, that called for this system to be culturally driven, family-oriented, and community-based. And what we have learned in the last 2 decades, that in addition to that, it also needs to be sustainable. So we, along with programs like Presley, are independent, right? We don't get money from anybody and strings attached to that money, because money always comes with strings. But we are self-sustaining. So we have a social enterprise called KÖ-A-KANAKA, and I'll put our website in there into the chat in a second. That is the fiscal sponsor, and we create programs. We create entrepreneurial projects like our Cards for 808 and other things that actually our learners are a part of. And so they learn entrepreneurship hands-on and contribute to the growth of their own university. It's an ecoversity, and we are aligned with the International Ecoversities movement, about 70 organizations in 35 countries reimagining higher education. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. And I'm at my 10 minutes, so I will zip it right there. Thank you so much for allowing me to share. As you can tell, I'm super excited about everything that I'm doing. So please feel free to contact me anytime you have any questions. And I will also put my email in the chat. Mahalo nui.
All yours, Paige.
Aloha mai kako. I was really trying to get Presley to go before me. I tried to guilt her with the kua, and I'm pretty sure I'm the kaikaina here. But aloha mai kako. Ova o Paige, Miki, Kalāokananiki, aka Okamura. He keiki papavau no maia pa'ala'a waialua o ahu. And I guess I want to start off by saying that nothing that I do today would be possible without everything that was done before me by our kumu and everyone who've come before me, which includes Presley and Uhuluhulu University. But of course, Antiku, Kahakalau, everyone, all of our kumu, everything that, all of the hard work that everyone else put in before before my generation is really why we're able to do what we do. But like Craig said, first of all, I've never felt like Craig's classmate, even though we are in the same classes, because I learned something new from Craig every single time I see him. And I mahalo Craig as a kumu of mine. So I just want to clarify that. But yeah, I am one of the ko-kumu for the Ōlelo Hawaii initiative that is sponsored by ASUH Manoa. But basically we teach classes and they're open to the public. We teach Hawaiian language classes, and when we started, it was actually a non-Hawaiian senator at ASUH who had the idea. He's from Bangladesh, and I think it took an outside perspective to have this done, but in his country, they have fought civil wars for decades over the right to speak their native language. And he mentioned that when he came to Hawaii, he was excited because he thought he would hear Hawaiian and learn Hawaiian, because that's usually what happens when you go to a new place, and you would learn the host culture and the host language. But he was kind of surprised not to hear it. And the circles he ran in were just not the circles he would hear it in anyway. But because he felt like that was something very strange, then he had an idea of, well, why don't we have classes? Why don't we have classes that are open to all students, that aren't credit classes? So they're non-credit courses, not even a course. It's a space. It's a space where people are free to come and learn. So he created that initiative, and then he needed to look for kumu, and he had actually met with me ahead of time to even put the idea out there. And I remember telling him it's a great idea. It's hard to find somebody that will do it, because I think, and what ties into the essay I wrote for Hulihia is we very much have to rethink what we make time for these days. So my piece starts off with growing up, one of my good friends in school used to wear that Town and Country t-shirt that said, "I'm not late, I'm on Hawaiian time." And I hated that t-shirt always. And I know we've all heard that notion and that stereotype, but it used to just make me so mad, because I thought, like, what are you saying? You know, that it implies that Hawaiians are lazy and that we're late, and that is not true. And I always found it interesting and racist, and then nobody else around me seemed to notice it was racist. And when I think about it, I always think about how for Hawaiians, we are always on time, because we are always recognizing when the right time and place is appropriate for specific things in what we do. And so by trying to fit us into another Western concept of time, of course, didn't work. And of course, by demeaning us, right, it made that imposed system of time more important than our system of time. And so when I look at the successes this class has had, I do recognize that it was also in time coming off of Uhuluhulu University's successes, and showing the world that, one, people have something to teach and they're willing to teach it. Two, there is a great need to learn. And so by taking it out of the institution and making it accessible without having to, pay tuition, have graduated from high school, all these things, you reach such a broader audience. And so when we initially planned for this class, we also planned for like maybe max 30 people. We reserved a room. And on the first day, there were 300 people that came to UH. And And to me, that showed a lot about what they made time for, you know. And this was pre-pandemic, January of 2020, and 300 people made time that day to show up and be open to learning. We were open to everyone. Um, I would say exactly half, if not a little more than half, were kupuna. So, you know, having kupuna come, first of all, into town or to UH, some of them were catching the handy van. Some of them were busing it in from Makaha, which is the farthest bus route and longest bus route that you could take. Probably takes about 2 to 2.5 hours to get to UH on a bus. And they were busing it in early so that they could make sure that they had a seat. Was very impactful on, I think, not just us, but on the university, to see that many people, not just Hawaiians, in a room, from all language capabilities, from learning their very first Hawaiian word that day to we've had our kumu and our professors come in to help us. So for me, it was very important to reflect on what we made time for in the pandemic. I would look at my social media and see that everybody was learning something new. I mean, I learned to make kimchi. I've made a lot of kimchi in this pandemic. And I've cooked a lot. You know, everybody was baking bread. I was also baking bread. You know, suddenly we have all this time on our hands and people were finding things to take up that time. And all I could think about was the one thing that Hawaiian language speakers hear the most, especially when we're encouraging others to learn the language, is people who tell us, oh, I don't have time, you know. Oh, and to me, like, besides the well, what good is it going to do me? I don't actually hear that, what value the language has. I don't hear that as often as I hear, oh, I don't have time. Oh, I would love to, but I just don't have time. You know, suddenly everybody doesn't have time. But in a pandemic, you have an excessive amount of time, right? We're all at home, we're hunkered down. You're either working from home or you're not working, or you're baking bread and you're making kimchi. I crocheted like 3 blankets. So we have time. And to me, it's a reflection of what we make time for and what we make as our priority. So when we were in person, average 300 to 250 people made time every week, once a week, to come to class. Like Auntie Koo mentioned, it's all about making things relevant for them. We always made our lessons as relevant as possible. I forced interaction, which, you know, pre-pandemic was okay. I can force you to meet 5 new people in a class time, but really developing their pilina with each other, their relationships, meeting new people, encouraging them to come to class. And then the pandemic hit and we were online, and I thought, oh, well, nobody's going to come now. But we averaged 13,000 views in the beginning of the pandemic, and we still range in the thousands. I think I had looked at last week's and it was about 5,000 views. So I just really felt like for this piece and this publication, I wanted to take a look and really force ourselves to examine what we make time for. You know, in Hawaiian, ho'omanawa nui is not to have patience, it's to make time for something. And so when I did some research, and of course I pulled up all the articles about from our kupuna and the Nupepa talking about, you know, paipaiana ya kako to ho'omau your Ōlelo makuahine. A lot of the quotes have things like, you know, to forget our language is to forget who we are. So to me, any person who said, oh, I want to learn the language, but I don't have time, tells me that you don't make time to know yourself, or you've chosen, you know, that imposed colonizer perspective of yourself over your own agency to be the one to tell your history and your story. So that's kind of where my mindset has been in the pandemic on on trying to increase, and reaching more people to make time to learn their language and why that should be important to them. So that's in a nutshell what we're doing with the class. So mahalo all of you for coming. I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to let Presley talk now. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Aloha nui mai kako o wau o Presley ke alaanuhea amaksang no papakolea o Ahu. I'm Presley ke alaanuhea amaksang. Mahalo Craig for the introduction, and it's nice to get together with all of you. Mahalo Ku and Paige for sharing about yourselves and your work, and it's really great to see, because I think that what I'm about to share is kind of like a bridge between both of what you guys are doing. So it's really amazing to hear your guys' backstories and how it kind of interconnects with what I was able to do for our lahui up at Pu'uhuluhulu. But I'm going to make this very, very brief so we have time for some kuka and talking afterwards. My piece within Hulihia focused on the establishment and founding of Pu'uhuluhulu University. If you are unfamiliar with that initiative, amidst the occupation of Mauna Kea Access Road at Pu'uhuluhulu in July of 2019 to stand in the protection of Mauna Kea against desecration or proposed desecration via the 30-meter telescope. Thousands of members of the Lahui Hawaiʻi are people here within the Hawaiian community, both ethnically Hawaiian and allies, got together for a common cause. And that was to stand in protection and making sure that construction of a 30-meter telescope was not going to happen upon Mauna Kea. And I was one of the individuals who was fortunate enough to miraculously have time to dedicate to that movement. Just to give some background, I want to say for about 5 weeks before that, I wasn't even home on Oahu. I'm originally from Oahu. I wasn't home on Oahu for 5 weeks before that because I was teaching summer school at Maui. As Craig shared, I'm an educator, which is crazy for me to think because I still see myself as a student going through different programs. I see some names of individuals who are kumu of mine, and it's really, when I reflect, it's crazy to see how I got to the point where I'm at, which is kind of what my paper focused on. But I wasn't actually home, and I was able to go to Mauna Kea the day after I finished teaching summer school on Maui. And I went there with just the intention of being an added body or another voice to show my support in the movement. And I ended up staying there for the full 8 months up until we decided that it was ultimately the best decision to leave the space due to the pandemic. But my paper focused on Pu'uhuluhulu University and its establishment. And when we first were asked to write this paper, I believe it was the beginning of quarantine, about March, where I was asked to write a very short chapter or piece of a chapter on what I did up there. And at that point in time, I think I was in a different state than I am now, because that was just after having to leave the Mauna. And when I say that I was there for 8 months, I was pretty much there almost every single day. So reflecting back on it now, it's a little bit different from what I wrote in the paper. But within the paper, a common question that people were asking me at that point in time was, what made you decide to start the university? And what are you going to do with it now because of the situation that we're in with this pandemic? Are you going to start to move things online? What are you going to do? And after a lot of reflection, I think the main purpose of the university was because the Lahui, our big population, came together. It was an opportunity. I've been in academia my entire life. I've never had a break from it. Since I first started Papa Mala'o, I went through K through 12, graduated, went straight into a 4-year program at the University of Hawaii, graduated with my BA in Hawaiian Studies and Hawaiian Language, and then went straight into a master's program. And during that time, I began teaching as well. So I have been in academia my entire life. And one thing within academia, especially in higher education, is you like to theorize what if, looking at the past to kind of see what we can do for our future to better ourselves. So looking at things like what Auntie Ku does, how she's like, okay, we look to what our kupuna did, and we're going to implement that for our current people so that they can be better for our future. And I think within my academic journey, I got stuck in this idea of just theory and talking about it so much. So diving into the Mauna Kea movement, that was my first like real shot at putting that theory into praxis. And one thing that I often echoed when I went through school was the need to look at the stories of our kupuna and look at their brilliance and their intelligence and the way that they educated themselves and their forms of education, and trying to mimic and mirror those things. So when we were on the Mauna, a thing that you often see in a lot of political movements are things like teach-ins, where people start to share or educate little groups on why we are here, what's the importance of this. And originally that was the idea. But after coming together and realizing how many people there were and how many educators there were on the Mauna and how many stories there were to share and tell, and the big opportunity, me and my friend Kahala Johnson started to joke around and play with the idea of the University of Hawaii being a Hawaiian place of learning and rewriting that narrative and taking back what an actual Hawaiian place of learning could be like. And we decided to call it a university. All kind of like fun and games, but it took off. So I think for a really long time, I was kind of just in the heat of things because my entire day was just filled with scheduling and organizing and trying to figure out classes and how is this going to work, that I didn't really get to step back and see the impact that it made until I start to reflect and do these types of talks. And I hear from people sharing their experiences and how that changed their lives. But in the beginning, I would have to go up to people and be this little person that no one really knows about. And I distinctly remember going up to Auntie Ku on La Hoʻihoʻia in Hamakua and introducing myself and saying, you don't know me, but I know you and I know the work that you do, and I'd really like you to share at the university. And that's pretty much how it kind of organically came to be. And when I was writing that piece, I was trying to figure out what made me decide to do this. And the Ōlelo no ea i ka wā mamua i ka wā mahope kept on popping up because I remember the stories of our kupuna and their brilliance, and having over 90 percentile of our population become literate within a few decades. I think about the stories that they were able to continuously perpetuate. I think about the hundreds of newspapers that were published within our language and how they're able to hold on to things, even given the situations that we went through with the overthrow, with illegal annexation, with the outlying of our language and banning the Hawaiian language within the school systems, but we were able to persist. And I was trying to figure out what made me decide to do something like this. And I thought about my own upbringing and how my parents shaped me to think certain ways and how my grandparents shaped me to think certain ways, and how it was always about the collective. So that's what my article kind of focused on, was that we're all in this together. And oftentimes I kind of like to try and stay under the radar. Like people are like, oh, you're the one who did the university. It's like, oh yeah. Because I feel like it wouldn't have been possible without everyone. Paige taught there. Auntie Ku has also taught there. And I believe that you guys both sat on other people's classes as well. But it was a real time scenario where there were a lot of Hawaiians together, where we were able to take back what education was and what an educator looks like. So that was why Uhuluhulu University came to be. But now the question that often gets asked is what's going to happen next? And kind of what Paige was suggesting was, I wanted it to be a precedent. I think it kind of served its time and place. And from that, other initiatives started to grow. You see things like what Paige is doing. You see other communities offering free educational classes to their people. And I think when we reflect on what was happening at Mauna Kea, a big part of that was AHA, right? And one of the oli, or the chants that was used I think every single aha 3 times a day was Hulihia, which our book is named after, right? The Aikamumu, the one that the kids loved because it was so intense. But if you think about some of the last lines of that, it goes malu kapalio ka'awea e, right? So I think when the pandemic hit, that was the malu that was happening, that peace that was coming over us, because we were all in this together. We were forced to work together and be in the collective. We started to understand ourselves, and now we're in a place where we have to go out as our own individuals and hone in on our strengths and use those strengths to better the lahui. And I think that's where we're at currently, is we're in this sense of peace where we're still working as a collective, but we have to rely on people and their own individual strengths. So yeah, that was what my paper is about. And I just want to mahalo because it was really nice to hear, because Auntie Ku has been doing this for a majority of her life for so many years before I even thought about doing things like this. And to see that Paige used the university that was established at Uhuluhulu as a means to provide further education to people who didn't actually make it to Mauna Kea was just really beautiful. So mahalo, everyone.
Okay. And mahalo to all of you. Okay, we've got Kahikina coming in there. Oh, nane vale ke mau mo Ōlelo me ke a'o o ka la hui mahalo ya o ko a pauloa. Which we would expect, I think, from Kahikina, another wonderful kumu, in a traditional kumu. She just started off with a comment. If there are questions from the people who are on board at the moment, please post them into the chat and I will pass those on and that will continue the discussion. Just to give you a sense, we schedule these for an hour and a quarter. So we've got a time till 1:15 and I will make sure that we finish right around that time as well too. Presley brought up the notion of Kawamahope. Could you just each talk a little bit about who you feel have been the most important kumu for you?
I think for me, first and foremost, my ohana, right? Those who raised me, those who gave me a sense of identity. My grandfather, who I lived with for majority of my youth in Papakolea, where he taught me that being like something that I share with a lot of people is he was a big nerd. He loved reading. He loves going to the archives. He made friends with all the people there. And he taught me that being a nerd or geeking out on books and reading and creating, looking at your genealogy and creating songs and those types of things were the coolest thing that you could ever be, because that's who you are and that's where you came from. So that's my biggest teacher. But every single person who I've ever had a conversation with in some capacity is a teacher to me within themselves. Of course, I have formal educators or kumu such as Kahikina. She was a big kumu for me. She actually was one of the reasons why I decided to major within the Hawaiian language my last semester of school. But every single person that I've ever had contact with is an educator. And I think that's one thing that I wanted to kind of touch upon with the university, was that I didn't only go to people who name could be recognized. I went up to everyone introducing myself and asking them what they do and what they like. And I had young children teaching class. I had kupuna who just ended up talking about themselves teaching class, but people learn the most from them. So I think first and foremost, my family, my grandfather. But yes, everyone that I've ever been in contact with has taught me something along the way. So mahalo to every single one of you.
Kumuku?
I can say that I was extremely blessed to really get interested in studying Hawaiian language when there were still many Mana Leo or native speakers around. And I have to really acknowledge them because there was just so much ike. And unfortunately, I have to kick my own self because I could have and should have learned so much more from them. but it was people like Papa Kala Hikiola, Nali'i Elua, we called him Papa Kala, and he was at the Heiau at Ku'ilioloa on at Poka'ipe. He was the caretaker there. And he had all this knowledge about these celestial alignments and everything. And I had no clue what he was talking about because it was so over my head. And today, whatever he's saying, we're now we have GPS, it's all true. And I should have just learned so much more. Auntie Catherine Maunakea from Nanakuli, paper in Ka'u, Papa Awihi, Kili'ikoa, Mama Jean Keale from Ni'ihau, Kupuna Hale, with her high heels and her just go get attitude. So many of these, definitely Uncle Harry Mitchell on Kaho'olawe, these native speakers, just invaluable ike that unfortunately, as I said, I didn't learn as much as I should have in hindsight, but I'm still so grateful for the things that I do remember. And their aloha, I think, was the part that was just so valuable. And then I've been very fortunate and blessed to have studied with Antipua Kanakaoli Kanahele as a spiritual teacher and guide and mentor for decades, and that has made a huge influence on myself. And over the years, there were so many kupuna. Right now, I'm working with Uncle Howard Pea in Panaeva, who is just a jack of all trades, kind of, plus an expert in Ho'oponopono. I'm also studying with Auntie Lynette Paglinawan, who is an incredible teacher. Aloha, Auntie Pua. I love you.
Yeah,
I love you so much.
so no, oh my lucky, yeah.
Hawaii, wow, the first time Auntie Pua saw me, she looks at me, she goes, "So you're cool," and I'm going like, "Oh my God!" I had done that Mele of Kaolave, and she read it, and she looked at me. I was at your house, and so you're cool, and I just wanted to shrink into the ground. It was like, oh my God, But so much ike from you, Auntie Pua, and I love you and your whole ohana. My husband, learning from Uncle Ed, and we're still doing those ceremonies, and we're still chanting those chants. And now my mo'opuna iku mau mau, he's chanting it, 2 years old, So much ike from these kupuna that I love dearly and still honor and respect, beyond anything. Mahalo nui. Yeah. And then I have to say one more thing is Mary Kawena Pukui. That was, I got an award that time, Craig, when I did that speech about the Admiral Hayes, commander of the Pacific Forces, being inappropriate as a keynote speaker for our graduation. That was supposed to be Hawaiian. But Mary Kawena Pukui, and the ike that she has left through Ōlelo No'eau, through the dictionary. I met her one time, and there I have to also estimate Okini, through whom I met her and other native speakers. But the ike that she preserved for us in the Ōlelo No'eau, which I look at every day, which I feel is also direct verbal instructions of our kupuna. So that Iki I also have to recognize and acknowledge, and then the Iki Kupuna in the newspapers. But certainly Kupuna Mary Kawena Pukui has a huge influence on who I am and what I know through the Ōlelo No'eau that she gathered for us.
Paige?
I think Ilikimeka Presley, of course, like our ohana and our kupuna are the first pillars of our hale. I was fortunate to be raised by my grandparents too, and I think when I think about who I try and strive to be like, it would be like my papa. He was very very knowledgeable, community steward, did everything in Wailua. Anybody needed anything, he was the one doing it for them. He was very gracious and very open. He, welcomed kind of everybody. with open arms and made friends with everyone, which I struggle to do. I'm kind of selective in who I want to be friends with, but I think in my later years, and I always used to wonder why he would be so nice to everybody. And I used to think like, I don't know why we're talking to this person today. But one thing that he's taught me is that that is how you build community, and our communities are quickly changing. And I think, you know, the lesson there is, I think my first instinct when things change is to shut it out, you know, and shut out change. But one thing I think I take away from him now that I'm much older, is there's some things we cannot change, you know, and sometimes by embracing them and bringing them into our community is sometimes the best way to grow that community, and make those connections. So I think I learned a lot from him. There are things that he didn't teach me that I wish he did before he passed, like cleaning fish. Really could have used that skill these days. But I think for him, he was of the generation that didn't think some things were going to be valuable to my generation. I think he looked at it, like Presley said, like academia was going to be, I mean, it has been my life, but that's what was going to get us far. So I very much like Mina the things that he didn't teach me that I wish I had learned. And then of course being in school for the last all the years of my life, all of my kumu have been very, very important. I think I've learned just as much from them as I've learned from my family. Kumu Kahikina, especially, and Craig. That's 2/3 of my committee. And for me, all of our kumu have been so important to every facet of my life. Even what I do with this class and what I do at work is all sort of constantly guided by the things that I've learned from them in class and outside of class. And I think that's really what drives and sort of dictates my path. I feel like I always have the little kumu in my head, in the back of my head, when I think about, you know, what I'm doing and why I do it. And I think they also taught me how to be or not be sorry for being Hawaiian in any space. At UH, sometimes we get asked a lot, like, what does the Hawaiian place of learning look like? Or what does a Hawaiian space look like to you? Or when do you feel like you're in a Hawaiian space? And I think without them, I wouldn't have been able to say things like, well, wherever I am is Hawaiian space. You know, about wherever I go, they go with me. You know, they're all of that. So the moment I step into a space, it's Hawaiian space. And I think that's kind of what, you know, we think about when we think about Kawamamua, but also, you know, that we stand on the shoulders of everyone who came before us. So yeah, that's who I think about when I think about who are my kumu are that came before me.
Okay. Still encouraging people to submit either comments or questions. I just wanted to raise, because it was so important in some ways for all three of you in talking about this, it's that notion of Hulihia that, of course, was the themes. Noe Goodyear Pua, one of the co-editors, is the one who suggested that that was actually a crucial thing to be thinking about. But I wanted to put it together with something else. An awful lot of the pieces in the book talk about the fact that Hulihia is not only a kind of devastation, but a huge opportunity. And the single most important thing is you can't go back to, quote, normal. That things have been changed profoundly, and that you have to rethink what you're carrying on and how you are going to make things different. And one of the areas that really comes up in is a word that all of you have been using, community. The notion of you can't depend on government or educational institutions to actually set the parameters by which you're going to operate. And yet all three of you have to work in some ways in concert or conflict or in cooperation. So I was wondering if each of you could just talk about, as you see things moving forward in the future, how you see negotiating from the space that you want to occupy and those kind of forces that seem to suggest they sort of want to determine what the future is going to be like. Sort of, how do you deal with institutions to make sure we're not just going to reproduce the same thing?
I think that was a big struggle I had coming down from the Mauna. So I shared that I was there the entire 8 months, but in the fall 2019 semester, the class schedule already came out. So my classes were conducted in face on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I was flying back and forth between Hilo and Honolulu. And the first week that I actually had to leave after having been on Mauna Kea for 45 days consecutively, I had a really hard time, and I thought that I wouldn't have been able to go back to teaching within the institution, within academia. I thought I experienced something that has changed me, which it has changed me so much that it would be too hard to go back into a classroom where there were restrictions and where I felt like I was almost aiding in something that stood against my belief system. But what I noticed and what helped me a lot was that certain people will only kind of be in certain areas. So being within the institution and outside of it, I was able to kind of teach a larger demographic. So I think it's kind of hard to answer that question, but I think with more community input and understanding that if you work or if you collaborate with people, not just within what you're comfortable with, then that can cause a lot of change. Because what I learned through my experiences the past, it's not even that long, it's been like a year, is that you don't expect to learn things from certain areas. So collaboration is my biggest thing, and looking outside of what you would expect or who you would expect to collaborate with as well.
The person who's mowing the lawn kind of moved away, so I'm going to jump in before he comes closer again. I don't know if it's too loud, then I'll move somewhere else. But after being a public servant and working within institutions for over 25 years, to be just frank, I have given up all hope on government and government institutions. And not because there's not brilliant people and caring and well-meaning people within those institutions, because there are, but because there are systems, and systems are organically resistant to change, and their only function is to perpetuate themselves. And that's just an innate thing of systems, in my opinion. And so I prefer to work outside of the system. It's been very hard. Other people, while they do these kind of talks, which I do every day almost, get paid while they're still working. I don't get paid. If I'm all these volunteer, and I don't get anything for that. So it makes it harder to be outside of the system. It would be easier to have a job at the university, which I would clearly qualify for, and get paid while I'm doing all of this in some way. For me, every dollar that I make, I have to hustle. I have to contract myself out. I have to do stuff that I don't prefer to do. But in the end, being independent and being able to do what I really love to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it, with whom I want to do it, is worth it. And so that doesn't mean that I don't want to collaborate, especially not so much with the systems, but with the people within the system that are trying to make change. I try to make change within the education system. I really tried as a teacher, as an administrator of a Hawaiian-focused charter school, and I couldn't do it. We were successful as far as changing the way education worked and the outcome for the students, but we were not successful in making the legislation, just the legislators, just using them, understand that charter schools were rigorous. They still think we are not, kind of thing. They still think we're less than blah, blah, blah. And also the majority of people in Hawaii that still think Western education is preferable and better than Hawaiian focused education. So now we're just doing it outside the system, but collaborating with these broad people, right? Well-meaning, awesome people that are within systems to move forward, to progress. So I think for me, the Hulihia is e iho ano luna, e pi'i ano o lalo from the grassroots up. We're building a kuana na paya, a kuana kapaya. We are building the paya, the walls again from the bottom up. And I believe in grassroots movements. I've seen grassroots movement doing incredible things from when we first started, and stopped the bombing of Kaho'olawe, which everybody told us was impossible, when we were able to pass laws that protect the iwi kupuna, which again, nobody said that could be done. And then certainly Mauna Kea is the latest, greatest example of grassroots power. So I believe in that kind of power. And I am there now providing free education because AI University is a free program to Native Hawaiian youth and young adults. From a grassroots perspective, the ones that have not been served by the system or that the system has alienated, making them feel like they're less than, and empowering them from the ground up.
I think I can build on what Auntie Ku just said about the system disenfranchising a lot of people, especially Hawaiians. When I look at it, it's hard because our class is sponsored by the institution. It's sponsored by the university. It's sponsored by the undergraduate senate body, which actually also says a lot because it's not actually the university that funds our class. And by funding it, just it gives my my kumu, my hoa, and I like a honorarium to teach it. But it actually comes from the student fees. So for the UH Senate, undergraduate student senate to make a decision to use their undergraduate fees to pay for a class that not only benefits students, but benefits non-university people. And in the university, that's very difficult. University likes to keep the money to make sure that it's benefiting their students. So to actually open it up to the broader public is a sign that it can be done, and kind of reminds me that we have the agency and that it's still about the people. Like, we exist in this institution, but the body of people is much stronger than the actual institution. It reminds me that there's always there is strength in numbers, and the institution and the UH admin are not the numbers, it's the people and the community. Like, the community is what doesn't change. And I feel like, our class was literally trying to break down the walls of the institution and taking language outside of this elitist structure where you normally have to pay $5,000 a semester in tuition, as if you live here, and you have to come find parking, which is still a problem. But to me, opening it up to the greater public, that's really what made the movement so much stronger, especially because we're still having them at the university. Now we're online. And I have a new job, and I work for the biggest institution because now I work for, I do training for the Administration for Native Americans grants, these big ANA grants that are for Native people. But now I can even more clearly see the boundaries and the problems of the institution, because now I have to look at the federal guidelines for my own job. And it doesn't fund people, it funds projects. But now, so it's like constantly, my mind is constantly working on how to work around those sort of barriers of an institution. But I think the power is still within the people in the community. When we had class, even in person, no matter what, it was still more than half were all kupuna. You know, and that is a population that culturally we prioritize, but the current system does not. You know, that is like a minority group. But these are also the people that were disenfranchised. They didn't have time. They couldn't even learn their own language until they're well into their 70s. You know, like I'm over there coordinating handy van pickups for them. And to me, if I look at it, that's like the best example of how we've disenfranchised our people, you know, that they have not had the opportunity or time to learn their own language and history until, you know, they're in their 70s. And so for me, that's actually a strong community still. Like there are connections that we can make and honor and remind them of their own agency. And that's how I think we keep the community stronger than the institution.
I'd like to thank all three of our speakers for making the time today, with a special guest appearance by Auntie Puakanahele, which was a wonderful moment. I would like to remind people that there are going to be more Value of Hawai Hulihia events. They're up in the chat area, and please get your free copy or your paid for copy of the essays by all of our speakers today are wonderful, and many, many more are in there as well too. Thank you so much for teaching and for learning, and aloha to all.
Mahalo, aloha.
Mahalo nui, ahui ho, malama pono.
Heyo.
Oh, we all.